Thank you all for joining us today. And Suchintan, Manoj, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I know it's probably been a busy couple of days ever since the budget was announced, and but as we've discussed, right, as more time passes, you get greater insights into the fine print of what the budget has to say. And we are looking forward to, in the next 55 minutes, get your thoughts. But before we do that, just want to take a minute to introduce you. Suchit and Manoj are both partners at Deloitte, and between them have more than 4 decades of great experience in transfer pricing, indirect, direct tax, compliances, international tax. They've seen and interpreted, these budgets, or similar announcements many times over. So it's a privilege to be hearing from both of you, and looking forward to your insights. The way we are planning the next hour or so is that we'll kick it off with the presentation, where for about 15-20 minutes we can cover the salient points, after which we will I have some questions more focused on what some of the impacts are, particularly for the startup and the MSME community, as well as the fintech community. A lot of people who I'm expecting in the audience represent that group. And then we'll open it up for questions from our audience as well. So that's how we are planning it, and we'll play it by ear. But maybe we'll kick it off with maybe a 15-20 minute overview from both of you. Is someone going to help project the presentation? Harshita, Komal?
Do you want us to start?
Yeah, I think we're ready to start, and I think the team will scroll down the presentation as on your as you go through it.
Perfect. Thank you, Arpit. And so I think the theme of this budget, has largely been the government post the COVID scenario, stressing on infrastructure and reiterating that they will continue their focus on their entire expenditure, while really on the tax side they have stuck to not making any significant changes and not coming up with any new levies or any new cess that to some extent was anticipated. They have remained they have stayed with the current framework with minimal tweaks and really a lot of rationalization provisions. That's been the real theme of the budget. If we just move on to the key policy announcements, we will see that there have been a lot of policy announcements with a lot of emphasis on the infrastructure and with a lot of emphasis on the banking industry to ensure that remains stable given the entire post-COVID changes that are expected. Can you take us to the next slide, please? Yeah, so be it government or be it setting up a government-owned development financial institution for infrastructure debt, be it public sector banks that are proposed to be recapitalized by 20,000 crores, a new asset reconstruction company that is proposed to be set up, and an asset management company to take over stressed assets that are expected in the banking sector. They've also then spoken of setting up a new securities markets code, consolidating the 4 codes around securities that currently exist. They've spoken of privatization of public sector banks and a general insurance company, which we all know of, the IPO of LIC that is also expected to hit the market this year. So a lot of the collection is, or let me say, a lot of the inflows of the government are planned on the basis of divestments, which in some sense is a good thing because it then doesn't put a lot of stress on the tax system to be able to generate the revenue. These are the directional policy announcements that seem to have been made. So if we move to the next slide, if we just then narrow down and see the impact on the technology industry, again, that one theme that clearly emerges out of all the announcements that the government is making is that there is a lot of focus on technology, and the government is clearly acknowledging the benefits that they can make out of the technological advancements. So they have again laid their emphasis on R&D and have said that innovation and R&D is one of the identified 6 pillars that the finance minister identified as the focus, as the pillars for this budget. They have outlined a proposed 50,000 crore package for the National Research Foundation that will be spent over a period of 5 years. The government said that they will spend 1,500 crores to give more impetus to the digital economy. That should again incentivize digital payments. That is an announcement also that was there in the finance minister's speech. This being the first digital budget, the finance minister did underscore the entire importance of technology in governance and said that is really the force multiplier for minimum government and maximum government. The finance minister did speak of the forthcoming digital census, of bringing up the next version of the MCA, which is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs portal, with far more technological advancement, enabling GST digitization and further deep analytics that will be used even with the GST data that is being collected.
So, if I can, I know I said I'll ask questions a little, later, but if I can ask, your thoughts on, on the last slide, you talked about some of the big policy announcements related to infrastructure, and you talk about, the focus on, on technology and recognition of that, right? So while I think in spirit, I think that's a good positive sign. How do you think some of these announcements actually would, translate into benefits for, SMEs or even smaller startup technology players? Do you think some of these are more impactful and focused on, large companies and public sector itself?
So I would look at it two ways. One is, of course, the larger infrastructure related announcements and the policy announcements aspect would first trigger and are focused on employment generation, are focused on infrastructure building, and the ripple effect in a while would be felt through at the SME level in a while. So I would think it would start with the large infrastructure players, and then the ripple effect would be felt through and through. The announcements in relation to technology and having more focus on digital payments, I would think the government has made very let's say rationalization kind of announcements, and with or without this, it's quite clear that the focus and the scale at which the digital economy is growing is far higher than the traditional economy. and therefore that all of this will only act as a catalyst to the growth of the digital economy.
Got it. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that.
Okay, if we now move on to some of the proposals that may be relevant from a direct tax perspective. We can move to the next slide, please. There's no rate change. The headline rates that were there remain unchanged, which means that 25.17% headline tax rate that was applicable to companies that don't avail any incentives continue to remain. For new manufacturing companies, the 17.16% tax rate continues to remain. The MAT rate continues to remain at 17.47%. If we just move on to the next slide, equalization levy is one big change, or is one area that has been a focus area in this budget, which many people have taken note of. While a lot of clarity was expected from the government on this equalization levy, which got introduced last year, where non-resident e-commerce operators are subject to an equalization levy of 2% on e-commerce supply or service that they make into India. And this levy is applicable from April 1st, 2020. And given that it has been applicable, there have been a lot of aspects on this levy that have remained unclear. And a lot of representations have been made through the entire year before the government. Now the government has come out to clarify, one, that all payments that are subjected to tax as royalty or fees for technical services will remain outside the scope of equalization levy. This is welcome clarification. To some extent, at least it provides clarity and certainty, while the rate of tax on royalty and fees for technical services is about 10% normally under the Act and treaties. An equalization levy would be 2%. But however, the government has clarified in respect of online sale of goods and online provision of services, if any of the following activities take place online, they would be regarded as online sale of goods or online provision of services, which includes, accepting an offer online, placing a purchase order online, acceptance of a purchase order online, payment of a consideration if it is made online, or supply of goods or provision of services partly. If any of these are made online,
can I deep dive and kind of just use common language if we can, to make sure we understand this, because this is important. A lot of our customers and merchants are e-commerce companies. This is only applicable if you are a foreign, if you are majority foreign owned, right?
No, this is applicable only in respect of non-resident operators. So let us start with that. So it doesn't apply to a domestic supply. It doesn't apply to supplies made between two residents in India.
Okay.
It applies to a supply made by a non-resident into India.
Therefore, Arpit, just to again come in, you see the genesis of this is that a foreign company is today able to participate in the economic life of a country, which is a recognition that a lot of countries have now, that by remote participation they are able to let's say generate revenues for foreign companies. And I mean foreign companies as not being Indian companies, let's say, owned by non-residents, but really foreign companies which are offshore. And so the idea of equalization levy, and it's in a way a proxy for digital service tax as it is introduced in many other countries, is for revenues to be generated on the back of sales that are made of goods and services, and predominantly services, but there's a reason why it extends to goods. But services, or let's say intangibles, that are provided from overseas to the Indian jurisdiction, and this applies, let's say, to digital service tax in UK or in European countries and so on. But staying with India, it doesn't therefore apply to foreign-owned companies that are domiciled in India, but it would apply if any transaction was effected by a foreign company which has territoriality outside India and dealing with an Indian resident.
Got it. And the second piece of this, right, acceptance of offer of sale and placing the purchase order, right, a whole host of, details listed. That is to clarify that if I can use the parlance, even a marketplace would qualify. So even if you were just providing the platform, or does that mean that the marketplace is outside the ambit of this?
No, it's clearly covered. In fact, an Alibaba making sales into India clearly gets covered within this ambit. The idea was to cover those kind of platforms only, and like Suchint was mentioning, the premise of this entire tax and similar taxes have been levied in various countries in Europe and in some parts in Asia as well. This digital tax was to cover transactions where foreign entities are able to earn revenue from India without having a presence. While the scope has now been expanded to almost cover all the traditional supply chains as well.
Right. And as the name suggests, this is equalization levy in the sense that it's trying to create a level playing field and a net positive for therefore local retailers and e-commerce companies.
Yeah, the intent was that where local players here should are having their respective local infrastructure. If foreign enterprises are able to earn revenue without creating a presence, they should be levied a tax to be able to bring them on par with the local players.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, put differently, the point is that Indian companies anyway have to pay income tax in India, and up until now, the foreign companies would participate without having a footprint in India, and because of the permanent establishment not being there or a business connection not being there, they would not have to pay tax, and as a result, they were in a way profiteering from a let's say a profit shifting, as it were, that was taking place by way of them realizing those profits in an offshore jurisdiction. So effectively, this is a manner in which you're getting the profit, but or tax on profit, but instead of a tax on profit, it's a tax on revenue.
Yeah, understood. Okay.
Okay, so this is the single largest change from a equalization levy perspective. Should we just move to startups?
Yes, let's do that.
Yes, change. So on startups, really some income tax changes, and we can talk about some company law changes also that have been brought about. So under the income tax law, there is a tax holiday that is currently available to startups that are focused on innovation and technology, and this is available for a period of 3 out of 10 years at the choice of the startups, and it's applicable provided the turnover of the startups doesn't go beyond 100 crores. Now, this required the startup to be registered before 31st March 2021. The government has extended this due date to 31st March 2022, which means startups can continue and get registered up to 31st March 2022, and this tax holiday that is there under the law, they can be entitled to. The other thing that was there in the income tax law was a capital gains tax exemption for individuals and HUFs who, if they would sell their residential property and they would make any gain on the residential property, if they invest those proceeds into an eligible startup, they would be exempt from capital gains tax in proportion to the amount of proceeds that were invested in the startup. That was also applicable up to 31st March 2021. That has also been extended now by 1 year to 31st March 2022.
Can I ask one question to to get a better understanding of who's eligible, right? Let's say we have this window till March 22. Somebody incorporates their, incorporates an entity and starts a business. What else do they need to do to be considered a startup and get these benefits?
No, so the way it is defined is they have to be in an area of innovation, and it has to be a technology-based startup. So it's really loosely worded language, but it has to be tech-focused. And an application for getting a recognition has to be made with a central authority. So once that application is made and you get an approval from there, it's considered as an eligible startup, and then you're also entitled to a income tax exemption.
And so just to summarize for the audience, that this has to be a technology oriented innovation or a product or a service, and then it needs to go through this formal central approval to be considered for this, right?
That's right.
All right, great. I think the next one, I see on one person company, I think that's definitely one area that caught my attention. I know you have some comments here, but would also, as you go through them, would also love thoughts on, a lot of people operate as freelancers, on things that they're doing. Where and how does it make sense? Do you think it makes sense for people who are doing something as a freelance, a person converting whatever they're doing in terms of selling goods or providing services and become a one-person company?
Yeah, definitely. It does make a lot of sense, and I'll just come to the monetary benefit also in a bit. But the changes that have been announced currently are a lot of the company law changes, and those are to take off some restrictions that were applicable. So company law has this concept of a one-person company, while at this stage, the law has a limit. The paid-up capital in a one-person company, if it exceeds 50 lakhs or the turnover in any of the preceding financial years exceeds 2 crores, then the one-person company is required to convert itself into a private or a public limited company. This requirement now has been done away with, which means if you start a one-person company, you're not scared about it reaching a size based on which you need to convert it to a normal company in some sense. You can scale it up to whatever level you want, and it can just remain as a one-person company. That is the one change. Allowing a one-person company to convert into another form of company at any point in time is the other flexibility that is available now. At the choice of the entity and of course the shareholder, the entity can be converted into a private company or a public company at any point in time. And there is a relaxation in relation to the residential status of the shareholder in a one-person company. That is the third relaxation that has been announced. But to Arpit, to your question, this should encourage more and more freelancers to carry out their operations as a one-person company for broadly two reasons. One, a company is a separate legal entity in terms of its legal status, and therefore to some extent it ring fences all your risks and liabilities of the business into that legal entity, and doesn't all of it doesn't come on to the individual at any point in time. That is the key benefit of having a legal structure in place. The second, I would say, in fact, in terms of the tax rate, today a company is entitled to a flat tax rate of 25%, 25.17, like I said in the earlier slide, even if you don't take any incentives or any benefits. An individual's tax rate within the first few slab goes up to 30% plus surcharge says, which can go up to 35%. And in fact, now the slab where income goes beyond 2 crores and income goes beyond 5 crores goes up right away up to 42%. So I would think that this is another monetary reason why individuals carrying out businesses will prefer one-person companies rather than carrying it in their individual names.
Yeah, also to add, I think in a way the government has been, let's say, conscious or mindful of how different entities could operate. So there was an LLP structure that currently still exists. So smaller businesses do have the ability to go into proprietorship, but the concept of proprietorship is now in a way giving rise to either an LLP structure or a one-person company structure that in a way becomes the house of the business, as it were. And therefore, while the LLP today is marginally more expensive from a tax point of view than the company, but we have to be mindful of the fact that a dividend is still subject to tax, whereas That's not the case with an LLP. But the short point being that small and medium businesses have a good deal of flexibility now between an OPC and the LLP.
No, thanks for sharing this thought, and I think you're hearing it first here from the experts that you're a freelance business. You should look to think about setting up an LLP or a one-person company, because it has monetary benefits in terms of tax, and as well as you're ring fencing your business from from other aspects of your life. So no, I think this sounds like sounds like something that I think all freelancers should pay a lot of attention to, and make some right choices for themselves.
Should we move on to some of the other changes?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe some of these changes are related to corporates and large business houses, but I just make a mention of them. Treatment of goodwill. Goodwill has been considered to be depreciable in the past, whether it arises out of tax neutral arrangements such as merger or on account of slum sale transactions. And this is based on some jurisprudence in the past, including a Supreme Court judgment in the case of Smith Securities. The government has now upturned these principles and said goodwill arising whether on account of any tax neutral arrangement or even goodwill that is purchased along with a business will not be depreciable for income tax purposes. Only in case of a purchased goodwill, the cost base of the goodwill will remain intact and it can be utilized in a subsequent transaction, but depreciation of goodwill will not be available. That's what has been, that's the amendment that has been proposed. Some other judgments in the past also said slump exchange transactions, where you would transfer a business and in consideration not get cash, not get money, but get, let's say, shares of a company in return. Some judgments had held that, see, these kind of transactions are not subject to tax. The government has plugged these loopholes and said even slump exchange transactions will be subject to tax. Dividends distributed by SPVs below a REIT to REITs or InvITs were subject to withholding tax. Now that withholding tax has also been done away with. If we can just move to the next slide.
So on some of these, just to clarify for our audience, right? I mean, if you don't have to deduct TDS, that doesn't mean, I mean, this is just exemption of deducting of TDS, right? But depending on one's tax liability, right? Tax is still applicable on these.
So if I go item by item, see, advance tax applicable on dividend income only post declaration of dividend. Yeah, while the shareholder has to pay tax on the dividend income, what they have clarified is you will consider it for advance tax purposes only after the date of declaration of dividend. This was again an anomaly because companies could declare dividend, say, in the month of March, right. But an advance tax installment then would be due for the first few installments also. So right. That anomaly has been done away with. For REITs and InvITs, there is already an exemption on the dividend income that goes to the unit holders. While there is an exemption on the dividend income, the withholding tax provision today did not take into account that benefit, and there was a 10% withholding for resident entities, and therefore TDS was being done. That has been done away with.
So even though there was no tax, even though there was no liability, the TDS was being deducted, and now that's been done away with. So that makes. Okay, let's.
Sorry, one more point maybe on that slide. If we go back, maybe relevant to take note is tax audit. That was so last year the government had announced that all entities with a turnover of up to 5 crores will not be subject to tax audit, provided at least 95% of their transactions on the revenue side are undertaken digitally. And this limit was increased from 1 crore to 5 crores. Now in this budget, the government has further increased this limit to 10 crores. Therefore, all entities having a turnover of up to 10 crores will not be required to go through a tax audit. provided 95% of their transactions on the income side are undertaken digitally.
No, I think that's thanks for that call out. I think that I think is important, and clearly reduces compliance burden for a lot of small and medium players as well as startups. Can you help us understand what transaction, if 95% of revenue is transacted digitally? I think that's what you mentioned. Help us understand how that's determined, right? I mean, when we think of digital, right, we think of electronic forms of payment. How is check looked at in this, right? If somebody is if there is a check transaction, right, obviously it's not digital, but if it's obviously is if I can use the word non-cash, right? Is it more cash versus non-cash, or is it actually electronic forms of payment? How does 95 and what does undertaken digitally mean?
Yeah, so actually the fine print calls it out to be non-cash, while they call it digital payments here. You're right, because it's the exclusion there is in the fine print. The exclusion is that is provided not more than 5% of the transactions are carried out by way of cash.
Yeah.
So any non-cash transactions would be considered as digital transactions.
No, that's great. That's great, and that's what I wanted to highlight. To the group that you think of electronic and you think of NEFT, RTGS, and you might say I'm getting some of these payments through checks. But even with that, as long as you're not kind of collecting as long as you're not collecting more than 5% of your revenues through actual cash payments, that you have the advantage of not going through the audit.
That's right.
Excellent. I think we can move on to the next slide.
The next slide is on TDS on purchase of goods. Now, this is really a new section that is being brought in by the government. Now, what they have done is they've said all transactions of purchase of goods. So anybody who purchases goods in excess of 50 lakhs from a person in a year, and the person making the payment has a turnover in excess of 10 crores. That person is under an obligation to withhold tax while making payment on purchase of goods at the rate of 0.1%. Now, that is the obligation that is cast on the purchaser of the goods. Now, last year the government announced a TCS provision where a person selling goods in excess of 50 lakhs to a buyer, and the person having a turnover in excess of 10 crores was under an obligation to collect tax from the buyer at the rate of 0.1%. The government has realized that it is quite complex to comply with the TCS provisions. Therefore, they are now in some sense replacing this with a TDS provision. And they have also said that wherever these TDS provisions apply, the TCS provisions will not apply. This is going to become applicable from 1st July 2021. And while it looks straightforward in terms of its implication, administratively, this is going to be a significant amount of work to be done by all entities in the supply chain to be able to track this, for TDS to be remitted, and for credit to be availed by the seller of the goods.
And this becomes effective once you've spent the INR 5 million, or if you anticipate you will be spending more than buying goods worth more than INR 5 million, that it is applicable immediately.
Yeah, I think the threshold is based on the turnover in the when you anticipate it to be even in excess of 5 million.
So yeah, certainly looks like something for medium, for I think any business with with that kind of turnover will certainly have purchase of goods in excess of 50 lakh rupees, and I think this requirement of this requirement would put up, as you mentioned, I think certainly become a little onerous, and technology players like us, who support small businesses. I think that's a problem that I think would need to be solved for, and unfortunately, it seems like budget has given a lot of benefits, but this seems like an additional compliance for medium businesses to deal with.
Yeah. It entirely seems to be done with an intent to be able to corroborate all the data on the supply chain for goods, and for the government then to be able to reconcile this vis-a-vis the GST data that they're collecting through various sources.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
seems to
No,
be intent. Of course, it imposes, like you're saying, an onerous burden on everybody in the supply chain then to comply with all these obligations.
yeah, no, in fact, I was going to ask the question that, I thought GST was going to do that, right? That bringing visibility to the supply chain. Now this is an additional element, and then linking it, and the mismatch there would create more questions. So seems like some challenges on the way, at least in the next 1 to 2 years before this settles down.
Absolutely. And we've already seen the government asking us to reconcile GST data with income tax data. All these reconciliations are not easy, and there are various reasons for amounts being reflected there and amounts being reflected in income tax being different. But all of this calls for a lot of work on these reconciliations.
Yeah, and then there are some overlaps, like or perceptively overlaps, because if you think of equalization levy, that's for non-residents, but then there's also a corresponding TDS that came in last year on e-commerce transactions for domestic residents. So that's like a mirror effect, if you will, for residents, e-commerce operators. And the second thing is that what was last year restricted to TCS has been expanded to TDS. So people just have to keep in mind that non-resident transactions, resident transactions, TDS transactions, TCS transactions.
Got it. So no, so I think yeah, bringing all of this together will certainly add some complexity. I know we're probably what I'm trying to do is I'm just telling the audience to keep posting your questions on the Q&A section. I'm looking at those questions and passing them on through our conversation. So please keep doing that. At the right juncture, rather than wait to have these questions from the audience in the end, depending on how much time we have. So please keep posting your questions, and I'll try to share, ask those to our experts as we are going through the presentation.
Sure. So should we move to the next one?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, this is the other obligation that is going to come in place. What the government has done is wherever TDS is required to be done or TCS is required to be done by a payer, so there's a section under 206 AA saying in case the PAN is not furnished by the payee, then the payer will deduct tax at a higher rate. Now, over and above that obligation, they have also said the payer will have to ensure that the payee has filed their income tax return in time or for the last 2 years. And in case there has been a failure to file income tax returns, taxes will have to be deducted at a higher rate. So this is another obligation that is being cast on the payer, which seems very onerous in the way it is being put into the act at this stage. I think a lot of representations will be made on this because it's like, under the GST law, you can claim credit only if the supplier has actually posted the invoice on the portal.
Yep.
It's something similar to that, where you have to ensure, compliance at a supplier's end. Now here and it seems still, people seem to have reconciled it for GST for the transactions, but trying to do this on income tax and trying to say that payer will have to wait for the payee to have filed their returns seems quite onerous, but we'll have to just wait and see how this is going to pan out.
Yep. Okay, I think we can move to the next slide.
If we just move, so the next set of amendments are on dispute resolution that we may want to take note of. One is there is an advanced ruling authority that is currently in place, it has not been as effective in delivering in terms of its implementation, and therefore what the government has now decided is that the advanced ruling authority itself will be scrapped, and that is proposed to be replaced with a new authority which will be called the Board of Advanced Rulings, while the earlier authority of advanced rulings was to be constituted by high court judges. They have said the Board of Advanced Rulings will have what the CBDT will nominate two people with who will have the rank of not less than that of a chief commissioner. So two chief commissioners will form a Board of Advanced Rulings, and CBDT will keep nominating these Board of Advanced Rulings, where you can go and make an application and in advance ask for what is the tax impact of a transaction, and the Board of Advanced Rulings is supposed to provide an answer on what is the tax implication on account of a transaction. Uh, Earlier, the entire advanced ruling format was not supposed to be appealed against. The order was binding on the taxpayer and the department. Here, under the Board of Advanced Rulings, the order will be appealable. The taxpayer or the department can prefer an appeal against the order passed by this board, while the appeal will lie with the High Court, and some strict timelines have been prescribed. They have made this mechanism quite similar to the Board of Advanced Rulings mechanism that currently is under the GST law. That is what they have done.
Uh, what what can smaller, newer companies or startups can do to kind of adapt to this or react to this, right? Or that's something you just wait and watch, and once you get a dispute, that's when you deal with it. But is there something which which is an early action that someone can take to either take advantage of this or deal with whatever the government is suggesting around dispute resolution?
Oh, so like the name suggests, the purpose of this entire framework is to avoid disputes, and for you to be able to go to the board in advance and ask for a clarification on a matter where we don't have certainty, and to obtain certainty. But like it has been in the past, while these frameworks are put in place, they are not the implication is not in the manner in which you desire it to operate. So the idea is that in case as a taxpayer you're uncertain about the liability in a transaction, you're able to apply to the Board of Advanced Rulings and say, this is my transaction, please confirm what is the liability on the transaction. And you expect an answer to give you certainty.
Are there timelines suggested on how quickly we get this answer, or not?
A lot of that framework will come out, and I am assuming they will write out the timelines in a reasonable manner. We have to see whether it's implemented then in the way they are outlining it.
Yeah, but more than the Board of Advanced Rulings, the one that might be specifically of interest to smaller businesses might be the new Dispute Resolution Committee. Because this is one where, while there has been the experiment with the dispute resolution panel previously, and that was applicable to transfer pricing matters and international tax matters, this is one for specifically smaller taxpayers and with smaller dispute sizes. Now, this potentially could have been a pilot, if you will, but I think it's useful for smaller taxpayers because just like they had reasonable success, the government had reasonable success in the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme in terms of which interest and penalty were waived because of the ability to fast track assessment, because assessment timelines are being brought forward. And also as a result, deal with disputes in an efficacious manner. There is this dispute resolution committee that is being set up. Now, the hope is that it will function better than the DRP. The DRP has by and large not been as effective for the reason that it's revenue minded and it's confirming an order. So that hasn't worked all that well. In fact, it's by and large being regarded as quite a disappointment, except for the fact that it fast tracks your path to the tribunal. But the VSV scheme worked well, and this is intended to, for instance, reduce tax liability, let's say adjudicate on penalty and interest. So there is more leeway that potentially could apply to these dispute resolution committees and could be a useful uh, avenue for smaller taxpayers to be able to address their disputes regardless of their form.
So what the government has done is, in terms of the dispute resolution committee, this is a new committee that will be set up, and there will be small taxpayers who will be eligible to go and take their disputes. So this applies for after you have a tax dispute. If you file your return of income, if under an assessment your the officer has determined your income to be higher than your returned income, and you've then filed an appeal against this with an appellate authority, and this dispute is continuing for a while. This dispute resolution committee is to give you an answer in respect of pending disputes in a faster way, in some sense.
Got it.
So small taxpayers whose returned income is less than 50 lakhs, and where the dispute, where the variation between the returned income and what the income tax officer says is the income is less than 10 lakhs. So where the addition is less than 10 lakhs, these kind of disputes can be taken to a dispute resolution committee, and the committee has been given powers to waive the penalty and to waive any potential prosecution provisions that can be invoked by income tax officers to settle these disputes for the small taxpayers.
Got it. No, I think this is, I think, very helpful. Thanks for laying those details out. I know we only have about 8 or 9 minutes left. I wanted to maybe jump to a couple of questions and then we'll continue with the slides. I think there was as I'm going through the questions, I think some of them we've been addressing. There's one question on we talked about you have to if you want to be considered a startup, you have to kind of have a technology orientation. Can an e-commerce company basically selling goods online, can that be considered a startup as well? Is one of the questions we had on the set of questions. I know what's your reaction to that?
Can a departmental store, if I'm reading that question right, as a pure seller, I would find it difficult. You may not be able to say as a seller on a platform, can you get registered as a startup? If as a seller you have a lot of technology integration that you're working with, there are now sellers who say I have my own platform and I'm a platform on a platform. Then those kind of sellers we've seen getting registered also, saying my business is technology based. So I think the drive has to be that it has to be your business has to be more technology focused.
Okay. No, thanks for sharing that. And I think as I go through the questions, I think some of them we've been answering. One interesting one on it says, what's your take on the government announcing the outlay on digital, incentive digital payments? Obviously, that's a positive. I would probably turn that question a bit. And any thoughts on, they talked about this outlay, but was there any talk on where it's going to be spent and how it's going to be spent? Any clarity there?
No, I don't think they've done that. So I think in the past also they've taken a series of steps, on taking off these charges that banks could levy on various forms of digital payments. So at this stage they have not announced. So they've just said that they are allocating 1,500 crores that they would use to incentivize digital payments. On how they would do this has not been still come up, but I would think it would be in some form of charges being taken away, or in some form to incentivize more digital payments going through.
Well, while on that question, because because while the government has in some sense sidestepped the larger question on digital, but I think it's focused this time a little bit more sharply on fintech. Maybe useful for us to also talk maybe for a couple of minutes about the GIFT City and the possibilities about what is now given as new incentives to run a business out of GIFT City or out of an IFSC, because it has opened up some avenues there for tax-free operations.
Yeah, no, I think historically, I think every year over the last few budgets, there seems to be plans to kind of incentivize activity in the GIFT City, and This time, clearly, it talks about a fintech hub at trying to create a fintech hub at GIFT City. Yeah. And any thoughts on what all could materialize there?
Yeah, that is so. You're right. So every budget for the last few years has had a mention about the GIFT City, and it has in fact had incremental benefits that have been accorded to the GIFT City. The government, therefore, is quite clear to ensure that they make the GIFT City a success. This time, they've announced further concessions, which are really threefold in nature. The first concession is to incentivize fund managers of offshore funds to relocate themselves into the GIFT City and not to constitute a permanent establishment or a business connection in India. While there are some conditions outlined under the Income Tax Act currently also, the government seems to have suggested that they will relax those conditions further if fund managers go and get located in the GIFT City. uh, Offshore banking units, the government has said they can get registered as CAT 3 AIFs, and they will be entitled to benefits that CAT 3 AIFs are entitled to. They have also given non-residents some further benefits if they transfer their forward contracts to units in the GIFT City. The last change that the government has proposed is they have incentivized and they've said in case funds that are situated currently outside India, if they plan to relocate into the GIFT City by way of setting up an AIF, either CAT 1, CAT 2, then if this relocation entails the shareholders who have units in the fund outside India have to swap their units in the fund outside India with units in the AIF that they should get. This swap of units will be tax neutral and will not be subject to tax in India, is what the government has proposed again in this budget. So again, clearly a focus, and in the words of the finance minister, the government is committed to making the IFSC a global financial hub.
So I would say, if I was to summarize this, more focused on making this a global financial hub. I know there is a fintech angle to it, but it's more focused on larger global, trying to attract those companies to that GIFT City.
Yeah, this time it was these. The fintech, benefits were already there earlier, and they continue. The tax holiday entitlements that are available to fintech companies who can go and establish themselves as GICs potentially in the GIFT City. Those were announced earlier, and those tax holidays continue. This time around, the focus has been on fund managers and trying to bring funds into the GIFT City.
Okay. I know a couple of minutes left. One question I wanted to ask, not necessarily focused on on startups or MSMEs. What do you think were one or two things that were a big miss that was expected, or I think you were hoping for that didn't come through in this budget?
Okay, this may be long. So one of the things clearly that was expected, which has been there, but is short, is further clarity on equalization levy. And keeping the traditional supply chain out of the equalization levy. That's what the government has not come clean on, and while a lot of representation will continue to be made. The other one, let me say a couple of things. The service industry had an ask that the lower tax rate of 17% is applicable for manufacturing companies, and that should be extended even to the service sector. The government has not done anything on that. The third thing that was maybe an ask which the government didn't react on is R&D is continues to get incentivized in various countries. And there was an ask by various companies, particularly technology companies, to reinstate incentives for R&D spends. That has not again been done in this budget.
Yeah,
I
and
think the
just to
budget,
add,
I think it talked about encouraging R&D spending by the government, but that's one way to do it. The second way would be to try and incentivize the private sector to spend more on R&D, which is what comes through with tax incentives. So
yeah, Arpit, also to add, we were expecting that the dispute resolution process could have been more ambitious than it is currently. I think there is much to be desired in the manner in which appeals and assessments get handled, and we would have expected that the government would have taken a leaf out of the VSV scheme and made it more scaled up the process, which is right now, let's say, a micro scale. The second thing is on work from home, there was an expectation about doing something with respect to work from home benefits, and that maybe we'll have to look for what happens with the SEZ policy, because that's Ministry of Commerce. But in general, work from home isn't something that the government has paid attention to. Now, that's not to say that people would not claim their expenditure as a proxy for what they work in the office, but it may still go through the hoops of litigation, and it's not clear, and there'll be more ambiguity than less, and so that would have been useful to clarify, especially in this year.
no, I think some great points, and hopefully the government will listen and take actions on those. Either and not wait for the next budget, because there are some opportunities through different policies. But thank you so much, for sharing your thoughts. It's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you for the last 1 hour, and listening to your thoughts, and really appreciate the time. On behalf of Razorpay, we'd like to thank you, and thank you, audience, for sending across your questions and listening to us. Hopefully you found this useful. It was very, very informative and useful for me. Thanks again, everybody, for giving their time today.